Well, those who are joining us, just want to let you know, if you have any questions for Stacy throughout the webinar, know that we will have some time for a Q&A at the end. So you'll see a chat box that it will be on the side of the webinar camera page. So if you would like to use that, please feel free to type in any questions to organizer and panelists, and we'll be happy to review those at the end of our webinar. So we're going to give it a couple more minutes as people are still joining. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're going to wait another minute or two since we have a lot of people just logging in. I know how I am with my Outlook. As soon as my notification goes off, then I log right in. So we're going to give everybody a few more minutes to log in, get settled, and we'll be starting momentarily. Thank you. All right, well, I think we're going to get started. Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar sponsored by WILMAH on negotiation. Just a reminder for those who just joined, you will see a chat box on the webinar. So if you have any questions for Stacy, please feel free to type them in, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of today's program. Just to introduce myself, my name is Heather Fox. I'm Vice President of Industry Solutions from LifeLearn and board member WILMAH. On behalf of the entire WILMAH organization, we're thrilled to have everyone join us today for the first in a series of webinars for our members. Today, we have a very special guest, Stacy Purcell of the Vet Recruiter. Just to give you a little background on WILMAH, our mission is to provide professional resources, development, and opportunities in advocacy for our members. Together, our members aim to establish paths to help encourage and inspire each other in our current and developing and evolving roles, to identify and overcome challenges and barriers to success, as well as to provide resources, events, and mentorship opportunities for women, and to enhance and improve our career possibilities, as well as provide advocacy, action, enrichment for women in animal health. So if you have any questions about WILMAH or would like to get involved, please feel free to visit our website at wilmah.org. So to get things started, I would like to introduce our incredible speaker today, Stacy Purcell. Stacy serves as the president of the Vet Recruiter and is a global executive search and recruitment firm specializing in recruiting in the animal health, animal science, animal nutrition, veterinary, pet products, pet specialty, as well as agribusiness industries. She is in the top 1% of search consultants and recruiters in the U.S. And she has won numerous awards in the search industry, and as well as the first search consultant to specialize in animal health, veterinary, and pet product industries. Stacy was also a finalist for the Pet Industry Woman of the Year in 2014 and 17. Among the many other accolades, Stacy is also a certified personnel consultant as well as certified employee retention specialist. Of course, you can always find out more information about Stacy and her team at thevetrecruiter.com. So please join us in learning more about this fantastic webinar we have today, a skill that can change everything about your career, negotiation. Stacy, welcome us today.
All right. Thank you so much, Heather. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. And I'm so glad that you could join us for this webinar about the very important skill of negotiation. And I'd like to thank WILMAH, the Women in Leadership and Management and Animal Health, for inviting me here today. So I've started to record the broadcast, and hopefully everybody can see my screen. Like Heather said, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, just use the chat box. We have everybody muted today except for Heather and I. So we'll get started. So I have done quite a few webinars and presentations for both the animal health industry and the veterinary profession. And one of the topics that I have talked frequently about is skills. And that is why I'm trying to move my slides here, Heather. It's not scrolling. Let me see what. Bear with me just a second. Okay, there we go. All right. So one of the topics that I've talked a lot about is skills. And the reason why is because skills are very important to a person's ability to grow their career. And when I talk about skills, I like to point out that negotiation is one of the most important skills that a professional can possess. And it is what we call a soft skill, which is another term for people skill. We've all heard about people skills, and it's a skill that we can put to use when we're dealing with people. And I know the majority of us work with and deal with people every day. Of course, it's not just in a professional setting either. Yes, there's your current employer in job interviews, but there are other instances of negotiation that you have throughout your day. It could be with your spouse or partner, your friends, your children. Anyone who has children knows that there's quite a bit of negotiation that goes on with them. So every single day you're negotiating throughout your day in one way or another, even if you don't realize it. In fact, I had to negotiate this morning on my way to work. I was in a car accident. I was rear-ended this morning when I was getting off of the turnpike trying to turn onto a major street, and I was yielding to the traffic, and the gentleman behind me, he didn't see me, and he plowed right into me, glass shattered. I had to take my car to the collision shop on the way to work. They said it's going to be there for 3 weeks. So I had to negotiate with the insurance company on the rental car because I didn't have time to go and drive and pick up a rental car. So I had to negotiate with them to have a rental car brought out to me. So throughout the day, there's plenty of opportunities where we have to negotiate, and it's a skill that can help us just not at our job and our career, but also in our personal life. So I want to start out by saying what negotiation is not. Negotiation is not manipulation, and successful negotiation is not about manipulating other people to get what you want from them or from that situation. And there's an easy way to prove this. For example, employers want to hire candidates who can effectively negotiate. On the other hand, they don't want to hire people who manipulate people. Negotiation is a valuable skill. Manipulation is not. The negotiation is also not a skill where you have to be ruthless. That is not the hallmark of a true negotiator. And I do know that there are some people who may be ruthless when they negotiate. However, that is a short-sighted approach that may work every once in a while in the short term, but it does not typically work in the long run. I value and recommend building relationships with people, and you can't build relationships with people if you're ruthless in your dealings with them. So negotiation is an important skill that can make positive changes in your career. However, you must approach negotiation in the right way, because if you don't, it can still change things about your career, but maybe not so in the way that you were hoping. So before we get into the specifics of negotiation strategies, let's discuss why employers want to hire individuals with negotiation skills. And you may thinking, depending on what your job situation is, you might be thinking, well, why do I need to have great negotiation skills? For example, I think most of the people on the call are professionals that work in the animal health industry, but I believe there's also a handful of veterinarians and people that work in the clinical practice side. So even those people that work with animals throughout the day, you're still interacting with people on a daily basis. If you work in a veterinary practice, you're interacting with the owners of the animals that you're helping. So anytime that you work with people, there's a need for negotiation skills. Now, you may not realize this, but if you're going through a job interview process, then hiring managers are observing your negotiation skills. And they believe that that is an indication of how you're going to negotiate on the job and with your boss. And there are a number of things that come up in the business world on a daily basis that require negotiation skills. There are projects that you're involved with, deadlines and goals, and all of these things, as I just mentioned, involve other people. So it's not just what you say during an interview that's important, but how you would handle a job interview is just as important. And since I'm a recruiter and I speak with both hiring managers and candidates on a daily basis, I've had a number of hiring managers tell me that how a candidate handles the interview helps them to decide whether or not that candidate will stay in the running. When you're in a face-to-face interview, for example, you're being evaluated in a number of different areas, and one of those areas is negotiation. And you may not realize that that's happening or that you're being evaluated for that skill, but it is happening. Another thing to keep in mind is that negotiation is often a prerequisite for management positions. And that's because when you're in a management role, what are you managing? Well, in most cases, you're managing other people, in addition to managing whatever projects you're responsible for. So the ability to negotiate is considered a leadership trait as far as employers are concerned. And if you think that you're management material or you are in management, then you must be proficient in the area of negotiation. It's difficult to be an effective manager or a good boss if you struggle in that area. And let's put it this way, if a company is trying to decide which of two employees to promote to a management position, and one has good negotiation skills and the other does not, who do you think will get the promotion? So improving your negotiation skills is an excellent way to give you a competitive advantage in the workplace and in the employment marketplace. So it's well worth the investment of time and energy that you put into becoming more proficient in this area. So now I want to turn to the meat and potatoes of today's presentation, and that deals with how to negotiate more effectively. And there are a number of schools of thought regarding negotiation, and many of these schools of thought share some of the same tactics. However, before we dive into the specifics, I want to talk about a philosophy that I believe serves as the framework for negotiation. And this philosophy is what we call the principle of reciprocity. And this means when somebody gives us something, we feel compelled to give them something back in return. Conversely, when you first give something to someone else, then they will feel compelled to give you something in return. And I believe that motivational Zig Ziglar, he's an author and was a motivational speaker. He summed it up best when he said, you will get everything that you want in life if you will help enough other people get what they want. And I'm a big believer in that. And that's the central theme of effective negotiation, focusing on what the other person wants. And that's because if you're able to give them what they want in some fashion, it increases the chances that you'll get what you want. In other words, successful negotiation is about aligning other people's motivations with your priorities. But how can you do that? Well, there are three main steps to that process. The first is identification, and by that I mean the identification of your priorities. When you're in a negotiation situation, you must have clearly defined priorities, not almost defined or sort of defined. Have them clearly defined. And this identification of priorities includes a ranking of your priorities. And this is critical because not everything on your list may be important. And to paraphrase that old saying, if everything is important, then nothing is important, the key is to identify what is most important to you and then to identify everything else that is important in descending order. And it's crucial to remember that your list of priorities is a living, breathing list. And this means that priorities can and do change, especially over time. They can even change within a short-term negotiation scenario. Negotiation is a back and forth interaction. It's a give and take exchange, and it's often on the battlefield of negotiation that you discover what is truly important to you. And this is usually when you're forced to make concessions in order to reach an agreement. The second step in the process of negotiation is alignment. And the prerequisite for this is knowing what is motivating the other person or party. In a negotiation, this is usually apparent because they're actually telling you what they want. And what do people typically want in a negotiation situation? Well, they typically want some kind of value. And all that means is that there is something that is valuable to them that they want. And you have to identify what is most valuable to them. And once again, it's important to prioritize. Just like there is something that is valuable to you, there is something that's also valuable to the other party or parties. The key is to align these two things, what is most valuable to them and what is most valuable to you, so that ideally in a win-win situation, everyone gets what they want. And that's what I'm talking about when I say alignment. It's not easy, but it is a sought-after skill, and that's why it's important to be proficient in this area. The third step is action, and this is where the actual negotiation takes place. And this is where you make the connection between what the other person wants and what you want. It's where you're able to satisfy your priority while at the same time meeting the other party's motivation. And you might be asking, why am I using words like priority and motivation? And the reason is because motivation is a very powerful force. Nothing happens unless someone is motivated to do it. And motivation precedes action. In a negotiation situation, the other person or party is motivated by something. And that means they want to do something to reach a desired goal or outcome. So if you're able to successfully pair your priority with the other person's motivation, then hopefully they will take care of your priority for you. In other words, they will be motivated to address your priority because at the same time you're addressing their priority. And they're also accomplishing what is most valuable to them. The term that's thrown around the most, often describe this, is what we call a win-win situation. However, I think sometimes people use that term too casually because there's typically a lot that goes on into creating a win-win situation. It's not magic and it can be hard work, but it's worth it in the end. And that's always the goal in a negotiation situation, is to get to a win-win. So now that we have the principle of reciprocity as our framework, as well as the concepts of priorities and motivation as a backdrop for today's discussion, I want to go into the specifics of successful negotiation. And I have 10 steps that I'll address one at a time. The first step is to research the situation and prepare for the negotiation. If you want to be a good negotiator, you have to be prepared to negotiate. And one of the things that you can do is to know everything that you can about the situation, including what you want, what the other person or party wants, and the circumstances involved. And to find out what the other person wants, you'll probably have to research that person. In a professional setting, you can do that online through social media, sites such as LinkedIn, and you may feel like you're stalking them as you're researching them online, but you're not. You're just thoroughly researching the other person or people so that you can be fully prepared to negotiate when the time comes. And one of the most important parts of negotiation is the ability to make good decisions. You can't make good decisions if you don't have good data, and you can't have good data unless you do your homework beforehand. And you've probably heard people say preparation prevents poor performance, and that is especially true when it comes to negotiating well. The second step in negotiation is to hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst. And this is another way of saying that you must be confident going into a negotiation setting. If you don't speak and act in a confident fashion, then the other person will notice and they may try to use it as their advantage. So be optimistic and have high expectations. However, also balance that approach with the knowledge that things may not go as well as you had expected, or they may not go to plan. think about what the worst case scenario could be and accept the possibility that that could happen. And once you've done that, it can take some of the anxiety out of the negotiation process. The third step is to stay calm and do not rush. Negotiation is a marathon, it's not a sprint, and patience is a virtue when negotiating. And many times, the person who feels that they're under pressure or rushed is the person who makes the first concession. Not only that, but the more that you rush, the more likely it is that you'll make a mistake during the negotiation process, such as you could overlook something or miss something that could come back to bite you. If you're not a patient person by nature, then this is something to work on, is to be patient during the negotiation process. The fourth step is to actively listen. And this sounds easy, but it's not. And for example, in my line of work, I can't tell you how many individuals that I have come across that are candidates in a job interview process who do a lot of talking, but they have poor listening skills, that they don't leave time for to hear what the other person is saying. And that's a big mistake in a negotiation situation, because there's much information that you can gain and that you need to know if you want to be an effective negotiator. So one of the best ways to get that information is to carefully listen to what the other person is saying. And one strategy for maximizing your listening time is to ask plenty of open-ended questions. And this means asking questions that the other person cannot answer with a simple yes or no, because you're trying to get more information, not less. And I've actually had hiring managers write specifically into the job description that they want to hire candidates with active listening skills. They've even used that exact phrase in a job description. And that's how rare that skill can be within the employment marketplace. You would not think that's the case, but it is. So if you're somebody that possesses active listening skills, then you already have a competitive advantage in the marketplace. And if you don't possess that skill, that's another skill that I recommend to acquire. The fifth step in negotiation is to focus first on the other person and their needs. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but this is the basis of the principle of reciprocity, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. Start the negotiation by focusing on what the other person needs. In other words, focus on what is motivating them. And there's a chance that they will insist that you talk about what is motivating you first, but the fact is people love to focus on themselves and talk about what they want. So they'll probably jump at the opportunity to go first, especially if you invite them to. And when they do, show that you are empathetic to their needs and communicate your understanding of the situation, because this will actually subconsciously disarm them, since they can't get too defensive about the fact that the negotiation is currently revolving around what they want and need. So discuss ways in which their needs can possibly be met. Engage their reaction to the possibilities that are discussed, and focus on the ones that they seem to be the most interested in, because those are their primary motivators. And this is the point at which you must align your priorities with their motivation. The sixth step is to ask what you want and do not apologize for it. There's no way around the fact that you have to ask for what you want, and you can't be meek about it. This is a negotiation, it's not an apology. So you have to be assertive, but at the same time address the needs and the wants of the other party. And this does not mean that you should be aggressive. There's a difference between being assertive and being aggressive. And other people usually respect when you're assertive, but they don't necessarily respect when you're aggressive, or if they feel threatened by the situation. And this is a difficult part of negotiation for some people, especially people who shy away from confrontation. In reality, though, this is not true confrontation. It just may feel like it to those people who don't feel comfortable in a negotiation situation. The seventh step is try not to give something up without getting something in return. And once again, this goes back to the principle of reciprocity, which states that you should give something first. Out in the world, during regular interaction with other people, you can give something first and then not receive anything in return. Or you could give something and not receive anything for an extended period of time. But a negotiation situation is a little bit different. When you give first in this situation, it should correlate to receiving something back during the course of the negotiation process. And this is critical, because while you want to give first, you can't be the only person giving. If you're the only giver, the other person or party may try to take advantage of that. And some people will attempt to make you concede far more than they're willing to concede, and then that can lead to a one-sided negotiation. So while the principle of reciprocity is in full effect here, it's with a slightly accelerated curve. The eighth step is to do not take the negotiation personally. And this is sometimes easier said than done, but try to be as objective as you possibly can. And this is difficult because sometimes emotions often become part of the equation. But just remember that the other person's attempts to negotiate don't constitute a personal attack on you. Their attempt to negotiate doesn't mean that they don't care about you or your situation. Another potential problem arises if you don't care for the personality of the other person. Perhaps they rub you the wrong way, which can happen. It's impossible to like everyone, and eventually you're going to run across somebody like this that you just don't really care for. But once again, stay objective. Focus on the matter at hand, the negotiation, and not on the personality or the attitude of the person or people that you're negotiating with. And number 9, remember that this is a relationship, not just a negotiation. And by not taking what happens during the negotiation personally, you're better able to maintain a relationship with that person or the group of people going forward. And this is especially the case in the professional realm. You need to maintain calmness and nurture those professional relationships, even if you don't care for the people with whom you have that professional relationship. And as a result, don't view the negotiation as the last time that you're going to see this individual, that you can just get what you want and then be done with them. Instead, carefully navigate the negotiation in the same way that you would develop and cultivate a relationship. Assume that you're going to interact with this person in some capacity in the future. And remember, we work in a fishbowl here in the animal health industry and the veterinary profession. It's a very small industry. So with that in mind, you'll have a more even-handed approach, and that approach will yield more productive results, both in the short term and the long term. And our 10th step is to summarize, confirm the results, and set expectations. The end of the negotiation is the most important part because you went through a number of steps and did quite a bit of work to get to this point. So this is no time to drop the ball. This is the time to review what transpired and what the two sides have agreed to. This way, there is no miscommunication that will undo everything that you just did. And once the results have been confirmed by all parties, set expectations for the future. Everyone should know what is going to happen next and why. By setting expectations, you're able to point back to them later if somebody does not do what they said they were going to do. And due diligence after the fact is a critical component of effective negotiation. As the saying goes, you must inspect what you expect. And so next, I'd like to take a few moments to discuss why negotiation is a particularly important skill for women. And I believe that most of the people on our call today are women. There are a few men. It is no secret that women sometimes are at a disadvantage to men in the employment marketplace, starting with the fact that there have been a lot of reports out there about women earning less money on average than their male counterparts. And then you have the dynamic that exists between men and women in the workplace. Sometimes I've heard women say that they feel that men sometimes overlook or dismiss women in the workplace. And so that means that women have said that they have to sometimes work harder to become noticed or to get the recognition that they deserve. Now, in my line of work, I have spoken with thousands of candidates throughout my career as a recruiter, both men and women. And I have personally noticed a difference between men and women in their approach to some situations, including negotiation. And I'll illustrate this with a few case studies, including one that involved me personally. In the first scenario, I was working with a candidate, a female, on a job search. I was working with one of my clients to conduct a search, and she was a finalist for the position. She was highly experienced, very qualified. But she asked me a very perplexing question. She wanted to know if there were internal candidates that were applying for the same position that she was applying for as an external candidate. So she wanted to know if there were other people inside my client's organization who were interviewing for the same position. And she told me she was worried that if she got the job, that she would be resented by the internal candidates who did not get the job. And she was worried that some of those people might make her job and her life more difficult. And that it really took me aback. And I said to her, I said, this is a question that a man would never ask me. I said, in fact, in my 20 plus years of being a recruiter, a man has never asked me that kind of a question or expressed that kind of concern. And unfortunately, that is something that I have seen come up occasionally, not often, but sometimes with women. I have noticed that sometimes they can come across as more timid, reluctant, indecisive, or sometimes lacking confidence about going after what they want, or sometimes talking themselves out of moving forward to pursue opportunities. And I'm, of course, not saying this to be sexist. Obviously, I'm a woman. All I'm doing is communicating on what I have seen. So men will often say, pick me for this position, even if they don't have the qualifications for the job. While some women will talk themselves out of moving forward out of fear or lack of confidence, even when they're qualified in the position. In the second scenario, I called an individual about an opportunity with one of my clients. It was an opportunity that was clearly better than the position that she currently had. And the reason that it was better is it offered more compensation and greater responsibility, but it was also located geographically in an area where she said that she would rather work. So the person in this new role was going to report to the head of the business unit. And at her current company, there were 3 people between her and the head of the business unit. So she did go out on a face-to-face interview. My client, who is also a woman, was very interested and wanted to move her forward in the process. However, my candidate declined, and when I asked her why, she said she was intimidated by the role. She said she was afraid that she would not meet my client's expectations. The hiring manager and myself, on the other hand, cannot disagree more. The hiring manager, which was the head of the business unit, was very interested in this candidate and was disappointed that she did not want to move forward in the interview process because she was already on the short list of candidates and she had an excellent chance of receiving an offer of employment. In fact, she was the candidate my client was most interested in when she decided to withdraw from the process because she said the role intimidated her. So the candidate allowed fear to dictate her actions, or in this case, her inactions. And in my third case study, I have a personal story from early in my own career. I was working for a large international search firm, and I was in my 20s, and I was the youngest person working in my office. And a Fortune 500 company wanted to do business with me, so I set up a meeting with the vice president. But there was a gentleman in our organization who had been trying to land this client for quite some time. However, he had not been successful. And this man at the time was twice my age, and he resented the fact that a young woman had gotten an appointment with this company. So this man went to our boss, and he said that he should have the account and not me. And I had no idea that he was trying to land this client because he placed engineers and I placed sales and marketing executives. I didn't place engineers. So the people he was calling on at this company were not the same people that I was calling on. And I had no idea he had been trying to land that client. So he went into our boss's office and asked our boss if he could attend the meeting with me. And he said that that should be his key client. And so as you can imagine, I was not happy about that. But what I did is I stood up for myself and I told my boss that I earned the right because I earned that appointment. And so I had earned the right to go to the meeting by myself. And so I was able to go into my boss's office and negotiate effectively. And then I went to the meeting and landed that client. And so as you can see, confidence is a key component of effective negotiation and also of advancing in the workplace and advancing in your career. And that's why I believe that if you're a female working in the animal health industry or the veterinary profession, negotiation is a skill that you should learn and become very good at, because negotiation is a valuable skill and it's a great way for women to level the playing field with men. It may not necessarily completely level the playing field, but you can definitely use it to your advantage. So men are not necessarily better at negotiation. And I do want to say that, sometimes people, and, this could be men or women, may try to use bullying as their negotiation technique. But that does not mean that they're better at negotiating because of it. Bullying is a lazy negotiation technique, and it's not a very good one. Before I started my own business, I worked as a recruiter and search consultant for a large international franchise. And I worked with a number of men, and some, like this gentleman I just gave in my example, thought that they could bully me because I was half their age and I was female. What I did not allow them to do was intimidate me or outwork me. In fact, I outworked them. I outworked everyone in our office, and I became a master of negotiation. But more importantly, I became confident in my abilities, and that included my abilities to thrive in the workplace with men. I've negotiated with men and women. I've been assertive in negotiations, and people have come to respect me because of it. Now, it's true that sometimes people have resented my assertiveness and confidence. Some men too, but that's not my problem. And so, when it comes to negotiation skills and your career, your number one priority is not to be liked by everyone. We all want to be liked, but it's more important to be respected by both men and women alike. And the way to make that happen is by earning that respect by doing things the right way. And it won't happen overnight, and it didn't happen overnight in my situation, but it can and will happen. You just have to be as persistent as you are confident. So there is another skill that's closely related to negotiation, and that skill is emotional intelligence. And I want to talk about this skill for a couple of reasons. First, it's a skill that can help you become a better negotiator. And second, emotional intelligence is a skill at which women excel to a greater extent than men. I think we can all agree that women are more emotional than men and that they're more attuned to their own emotions. And now I would agree that that doesn't necessarily make them better than men in the area of emotional intelligence. However, recent studies do prove that that's the case. So, according to research conducted 2 years ago by the Hay Group Division of Korn Ferry, women scored higher than men on nearly all emotional intelligence competencies. There was only one competency in the study where women did not score higher than men, and that was emotional self-control, which is not too surprising, but we'll give men that one. So here are some findings from the Korn Ferry research. The greatest difference between men and women can be seen in emotional self-awareness, where women are 86% more likely than men to be seen as using the competency. Women are 45% more likely than men to be seen as demonstrating empathy consistently. In other competencies in which women outperform men are coaching and mentoring, influence, inspirational leadership, conflict management, organizational awareness, adaptability, teamwork, and achievement orientation. And as you can see, emotional intelligence is an area in which women can gain an edge in the workplace and in the employment marketplace. And before we discuss emotional intelligence and its role in negotiations, I want to review what exactly emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence can be broken into 5 basic components. And those components are awareness. This means that you should not be just aware of your emotions, but also the emotions of other people. And this involves being able to identify what those emotions are, because if you can't understand them, you can't identify them in the first place. The second is regulation, and there's 2 parts to this. First, there's the ability to control your own emotions, especially your emotional response to what happens to you. And second is your ability to influence the emotional response of other people. The third is empathy. After identifying the emotions of others, you should be able to empathize with them. And basically, you must put yourself in their shoes and imagine what emotions that they're experiencing. And the fourth is motivation. And motivation speaks to the overriding goal of emotional intelligence. And that goal is to apply emotional intelligence to real world situations for the purpose of solving problems within the workplace. And with that in mind, everything stems from motivation. You must be motivated to solve problems through emotional intelligence. And the fifth is social skills. People who are extroverted often have better emotional intelligence skills than those who are introverted. And that's not always the case, but those people who feel at ease in social situations are more likely to excel when it comes to emotional intelligence. But social skills can be developed. There are 5 steps that you can take to develop your emotional intelligence. The first is to observe and identify your feelings. As you might imagine, you have to start with yourself because before you can practice the skill of emotional intelligence, you have to have a firm grasp on your own emotions. How you observe your feelings is up to you, but choose a way that works best for you. You could write them down or even type them into your phone. And then two, identify those things that affect your emotions. Identifying your emotions is one thing, but knowing what drives them is another. And this might involve quite a bit of introspection and self-analysis because sometimes what's impacting you is not readily apparent. And third, identify those things that cause you stress. Once you've identified those things that are affecting your emotions, you can more easily identify the things that are causing you stress. And then you can try to change some of those things. And this is important because the goal of emotional intelligence is successfully handling not only your stress, but also the stress of others in the workplace. And number four, put yourself in other people's emotional shoes. Before you can manage other people's emotions, you have to be able to empathize with them, which I mentioned earlier. And to do this, you must see things from their perspective or their point of view. When you do that, you'll be able to identify their motivation for the things that they say and do. Number five, tie your efforts to a specific outcome or objective. What specifically do you want to accomplish with your skills and emotional intelligence? And that can vary depending upon your situation, but it's important to have a specific outcome in mind. And this can help you stay the course during the situation in your pursuit. So resiliency is necessary when you're dealing with stressful circumstances. So as you can see, being empathetic or having empathy is part of negotiation. And when you can identify what is motivating the other person and empathize with them, then you've started the process of negotiation on the right foot. But that's not the only application. People who are proficient in emotional intelligence are in touch with their own emotions. They know what causes them self-stress and they know how to handle that stress. And that comes especially handy in negotiations because it allows you to remain calm and not overreact in any way to something that somebody said. And of course, according to the Korn Ferry study, emotional self-control is the only area in which women did not outperform men. So if there's one area in which you want to focus in regards to emotional intelligence and negotiation, it's emotional self-control. If you're negotiating with a man, he could believe that emotional self-control is your weakness and attempt to exploit that, but you cannot allow somebody to do that successfully. So now we've come to the part of the presentation that many of you may have been waiting for, and that's the part of negotiating money. And I'm going to break this down into two sections. First, how to negotiate raises and promotions within your current employer. And second, how to negotiate money if you're in a job interview process with a potential new employer, especially when you get to that end of the interview at the offer stage process. And I'd like to spend a few minutes discussing those things because I think that they're important and also because I believe that there are some individuals who take the wrong approach when it comes to money negotiation. And I say this because I've seen people do this and I've seen it damage their efforts. So let's start with negotiating with your current employer for a raise. There are three main steps involved in this process. And the first step is to research what you're worth. Now, there are some websites out there that are devoted to this type of research, and one of them is salary.com. And these websites usually have a salary calculator that will help determine what someone with your job title is earning in a certain geographical location. And there are some other factors involved too, including your years of experience. When you're researching your worth, be sure to note any additional responsibilities that you've taken on since you were hired. Perhaps you have duties now that you did not have when you were first hired, and those should definitely factor into the equation of what you're worth. And remember that any raise that you ask for has to correspond to the value that you're currently providing to your employer. When you ask for a raise, you're basically telling your boss that you're providing far more value to the organization than the organization is compensating you for. And that is a bold statement that you have to be prepared to back it up with hard facts, figures, and specifics. The second step is to build your case. And this goes back to what we talked about with doing homework prior to a negotiation. Since you'll be negotiating with your boss, you probably know a lot about him or her, so that should help you get started. When building your case, you'll need to present specific instances where you provided tremendous value to the organization and ways that you provide continuous value. Not stating the value, just not, excuse me, just stating the value is not enough. However, you need some tangible, something in paper or electronic form. It could be a handout, it could be a spreadsheet. But you just need to present your case in the most tangible way possible with the most impactful evidence possible. And the third step is to practice. Preferably use another person to do role playing. Pretend that that person's your boss and have them ask you questions that your boss is likely to ask, and practice how you will answer those questions and practice presenting your case. And remember, you should come across as confident. If you don't come across as confident, then that's not the right time to be asking for a raise. But only move to the next step when you feel confident about your case and about your ability to present it to your boss, and keep practicing until you reach that point, because you may only have one opportunity at it. The fourth step is to present your case. However, there is one caveat with this. You must also time your presentation right. Remember, the organization must have money to give you, even if you successfully present your case. The whole thing is predicated on the fact that your employer actually has the money necessary to give you a raise, because if it doesn't, then it's a moot point. So, for example, the economy has to be good, the organization has to be doing well financially. In terms of the timing, if you've just done something of great value to the organization, then that would be a good time to ask for a raise. Also, when was your last performance review? Did you receive a raise at that review? If so, then be prepared to explain why you should receive more money now and why should a raise be provided. So timing is very important in this situation. But whatever you do, don't ask for a raise on the day that your boss seems particularly stressed, because if your boss is under stress, chances are good that they will not react well to your request for a raise. So gauge that situation fully before proceeding, and then follow the 10 steps I mentioned earlier in this webinar. So strive to present your case so well that even if you don't get a raise, your boss will be impressed by the way you approach the situation. So moving on to how to negotiate money when you're in a job interview process with a potential new employer, especially when you get to that offer stage. In my 20 plus years of experience working as an executive recruiter in the animal health and veterinary industry, one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is when it comes to negotiating money is something that I call negotiating backwards. And now, what does that mean, negotiating backwards? Well, I'll illustrate with an example, and this is something that's happened a number of times throughout my recruiting career. So say I reach out to an individual about a job opportunity with one of my clients, and that person is interested. However, they don't want to move forward yet. First, they want to know, what will the compensation be? Now, I can't answer that question fully. And the fact of the matter is, I have no idea what the compensation offer is going to be that my client's going to make if they make an offer to this person. Now, I have a range that my client has given me, but it's ironic that this candidate is asking me what the compensation will be, because they actually have more influence over what the compensation will be than I do. And the reason is that everything depends on how well this candidate performs during the interview process and how much they impress the hiring manager. So when a candidate asks me what is the starting compensation for a particular employment opportunity, I'm going to have to guess, because that exact number is impossible for me to answer. Now, then, of course, there's the issue of the offer, the job offer itself. First, as a candidate, you have to earn the right to receive an offer. Just because you're a candidate and the organization is considering you for a job does not automatically mean that you're going to get an offer of employment. So you're almost putting the cart before the horse when you ask, what is the starting compensation for a job, when you have not interviewed for the job yet. And you might be thinking, well, what about my resume? Won't my resume convey how much value I can bring to this organization, and therefore that should dictate how much they would be willing to pay me? But not all of a candidate's value is conveyed or contained in their resume. After all, if it was all contained in the resume, there would be no need for interviews. But the interview process is necessary, and it's necessary because organizations want to evaluate candidates at all levels, including how they present themselves, their communication skills, and how they're going to fit into the company's culture. Now, all of this, the resume, a candidate's skills and experience, and the face-to-face interview are first to determine which candidate receives the offer of employment, and second, what the compensation level associated with that offer will be. So when you negotiate backwards, you put yourself at risk for losing leverage. And I'm a big proponent of having leverage. When you have leverage, you can move to a position of strength in any given situation. So leverage is a valuable commodity in the employment marketplace. And to illustrate what I just said, I'm going to run through a hypothetical situation. Let's say that a job candidate wants to know what their starting salary will be for a particular open position. So the hiring manager provides a number. So let's peg that number as not too high and not too low. The candidate decides to go ahead and interview for the position, and they interview well. They interview so well that the hiring manager decides to make them a job offer. But here's the problem with that. No matter how well the candidate interviewed, the hiring manager is going to extend a job offer that contains the compensation number that they provided to the candidate before the interview. With their performance during the interview, the candidate may have earned themselves a better offer, but now they're not going to get a better offer, and that's called losing leverage and leaving money on the table. So here's the bottom line with that. The interview itself can give you more leverage when it comes to negotiating salary and compensation, and you have the power to affect the final outcome. So don't negotiate backwards and try to negotiate before you go into an interview because you lose leverage in the process. So approach the situation correctly so that you can put yourself in the best position possible to receive the best job offer. I also have another reason why not to negotiate backwards and ask for the starting salary or what the compensation will be. Because you might go and interview for one position, but actually get hired for another position. And the starting compensation for the second position might be a higher range than it would have been for the first. I've seen this happen many times throughout my career as a recruiter. And I remember one specific example. I was recruiting for a director of research and development role, and my candidate went in and interviewed, and he impressed them so much that they offered him the VP of R&D role. We did not even know that that job existed when he went in for the interview, but it came with another $50,000 in compensation. So we're glad that we did not negotiate backwards because he got a great offer for a VP of R&D position. But when you enter the hiring process of an organization, you never know what is going to happen. And that's the whole point of interviewing. The organization wants to know what type of value you can offer and where you will be the most valuable in their organization. And that's why it's a good idea to be open and say yes to opportunities when they present themselves, because you never know where opportunities can lead, and they can lead to some places that you've never imagined that could be far better than your current situation. So negotiating salary should always occur at the end of the interviewing and hiring process during the offer stage. And that's what I want to focus on next. I have three main tips for negotiating money during the hiring process. The first step is not to emphasize money too much. If the employer is going to offer you a job, the subject of money is going to come up. The purpose of going to an interview is to get a job offer, and you don't want to jeopardize your chances of getting the offer. After all, I tell people there's no decision that you have to make until you actually have a job offer in hand. So wouldn't it be best to actually get the offer so that you know what decision there is to make and you can actually make a decision? Because if you focus on the money too much before the offer is made, then you may not receive the offer, and that's because company officials don't want to hire candidates whose number one priority is compensation. Because if they believe that compensation is the only motivating factor for someone to make a job change, then they'll believe that that person could accept a counteroffer from their current employer, or that they will leave as soon as another company offers them more money. The second thing to remember is don't bring up compensation or money first. Wait for the employer to bring up the compensation first. Your job at the interview is to sell yourself as being both qualified and interested in the position so that the employer will want to make you a job offer. And if the employer is interested in you, at some point they will bring up compensation. When an employer does bring up money and they ask you, what are you looking for? The best way to answer this question is to say, well, obviously, I'm looking for your best offer, but career challenge and opportunity will weigh heavily on my decision. You have a range in mind that you're planning to pay the person in this position, and I'd like to be somewhere within your range based upon my qualifications and what I bring to the table. If this does not sidestep the question, you're answering the question without giving a specific number. And this is a good idea because if you give a number that's too low, you could leave money on the table. If you give a number that's too high, then you'll price yourself out of the range. So ask the employer to make their best offer so that you have something to consider. And the third thing to remember is do not accept the first salary offer unless you're working through a recruiter. An organization is not always going to make its best salary offer right away. And that's because some hiring officials expect that there will be some negotiation regarding the salary. If you're working through a recruiter, the recruiter should know what your expectations are and what the employer's range is. And that way they'll be able to help you negotiate a fair compensation package for both parties. And the recruiter should ask their client to make their best offer. And then when the client hits the number that you've told the recruiter that you need, the recruiter should be able to accept the offer on your behalf. And it kind of works like a real estate transaction. I compare the two. If you're buying or selling a home, you have a specific number that you're looking to buy or sell the home for, that real estate agent is going to be in there negotiating that deal on your behalf. It's very similar to working through a search consultant. So I'd like to talk about improper salary negotiation techniques, and I realize we're running out of time, so I'll be quick. But I want to go through a couple of case studies here because these are real life situations that I've witnessed. In the first case study, I had a candidate who was earning a certain amount of money at her current employer. And during the interview, when our client was interviewing this candidate, she indicated that she needed to earn the same or more money in the new position, which is reasonable. I would expect that. So my client made her an offer that was $13,000 more than she was currently making. So I thought she was going to accept the offer, but she countered the offer in an attempt to get an additional $2,000. In the second case study, I interviewed a candidate who said that she needed to earn a certain amount of money if she was going to be hired. And of course, that's reasonable. In fact, during the interview with our client, she discussed that salary range with the hiring manager. So she told the client what she needed to make. And then after the interview was over, she asked for a starting salary that was $50,000 more than what she said she needed during the interview. And you didn't hear me wrong, that was $50,000 more. So not surprisingly, the hiring manager was not happy in this situation. Not only did she say, we're not going to meet that salary expectation, but she also felt that they had been a victim of a bait and switch. So I asked the candidate about her thought process behind her additional $50,000 request, and her response was, if you don't ask for it, you won't know whether or not you're going to get it. So then after the employer said no to that, then she shaved off $35,000 off her request. And so the hiring manager still said no. So then she shaved off another $10,000. And then the hiring manager continued to say no because she was frustrated and annoyed at that point. So at that point, she no longer wanted to consider the candidate for the position. And you can't really blame her, but it's unfortunate because the employer really wanted to hire this candidate. The candidate really wanted the job. She would have settled for the original number that she had given. But when it came to negotiation, she just thought, well, I'll ask for $50,000 more because who knows, I might get it. So if you don't ask for it, you won't know whether or not you will get it. That's really not an acceptable negotiation technique because it's an uninformed and reckless negotiation technique. It's really not a technique. So as you can see, there is a right way and a wrong way to negotiate. And one of my goals with today's presentation was to show you both ways so that you can learn not from just me, but also from the mistakes of others. And I like to use case studies in my presentations because it allows people to learn from the mistakes of other people. And in my opinion, that's the best way to learn because you get the benefit of the situation without having to experience the pain associated with going through that. So in closing, I'd like to say that I recognize that some people actually don't like to negotiate. It's rare the person who can't wait to get locked into a room to negotiate with someone. And I have to admit that I am one of those people who I don't mind getting locked into a room to negotiate. In fact, every time my husband and I have gone to buy a car, my husband says, go in there and get the best deal because he knows that I enjoy doing that kind of thing. And so it's kind of funny because it debunks the myth that men are better negotiators than women. I know in my family, my husband sends me in to negotiate with the car. He doesn't enjoy that, and I think it's fun to do that. And it is true that some people are just naturally better negotiators than others. So negotiation is just like any other skill. The more you do it, the better you'll become. But it does take a commitment, it takes practice, and it takes perseverance. So as I mentioned at the beginning of today's webinar, you may not realize it, but you negotiate every day in 100 little ways, and much of life is a negotiation. Although it's a skill that everyone participates in, it's also one that not everybody understands, and even fewer people work to become better at it. But if you make it a priority, then the skill of negotiation can change your career. It can change things about your job right now at your current employer, and it can change things with your job search. It can change your future and the opportunities and options that you have throughout your career. So I've been a recruiter for more than 20 years, and I own my own recruiting firm. And I have to say that being the best that I can possibly be in negotiations has helped me to reach my goals, and I know that it can do the same for you. So as we wrap up today's presentation, just to review what we've covered regarding the skill of negotiation and what it can do and how it can help you in your career. Employers prefer candidates with negotiation skills. Practice the principle of reciprocity. Align your priority with other people's motivations. Remember the 10 steps for effective negotiation, why negotiation is important for women, the role of emotional intelligence in negotiation, and the wrong ways to negotiate. And I'd like to thank Women in Leadership and Management and Animal Health for inviting me here again today. And I'd like to thank you again for joining us. I'm glad to be here, and I enjoyed giving the presentation. And if you have any questions about today's presentation or how you can take the next step in your career, here's my contact information.
Thank you so much, Stacy. And I really think you had some fantastic points. And I loved your point saying about preparation prevents poor performance. I thought that was very poignant. And I also love the comment about negotiation, not an apology. So no sorries, or actually sorry, as our Canadian friends love to say. But I think those are very important because a lot of times in our lives we do apologize, and this is not about that. So we do have a couple questions that came through. Quick, start things off, Stacy. If someone is saying, okay, they hear this, and now what are 3 characteristics you believe are most important for being a good negotiator? Because that will kind of help folks kind of work through that.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I would say that if I had to choose 3 characteristics, those would be confidence, assertiveness, and empathy. I would choose confidence as the most important trait because I mentioned in some of those case studies that I presented how a lack of confidence can be harmful to professionals, both in their employment situation and also in a job search. So to be a good negotiator, you have to be confident. And if you don't feel confident, then that's going to impact how you act. And then, the assertiveness, but without being a bully, and you want to have empathy for the other person.
That's perfect. Thank you. Another question came through that saying, how can a person start to become a better negotiator right now, regardless of where they are in their career, whether they're just entry level or at a senior management?
Another great question, and I would say if you're on this webinar today, that's a great starting point. And we recorded this webinar, so we'll have that available too. So I'd recommend going back through those points that I made. And then I'm a big proponent of continuous education and learning. So I would suggest reading books on negotiation, attending more webinars, and just look for educational opportunities out there regarding negotiation. And then practice your negotiation skills in real life settings. Start small, possibly with friends and family. Practice the techniques and practice reacting to other people's techniques, and then seek to become better at emotional intelligence, which I mentioned is also helpful with negotiation. So work on your skills in the workplace with your current employer as opportunities arise.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question came in. Is negotiation more important in this type of economy where there's plenty of employment opportunities available? So if you could talk a little bit about that, Stacy.
Yes, Yes, yeah, I would say that it's very important in any type of economy. And yes, you're right. Right now, we are currently in what we call a candidate's job market, where that means that there are more job opportunities available than qualified candidates to fill them. But we also know with economies that they're cyclical, so they can, always change. We had a different economy during the Great Recession, back in around 2008. So it's always a good time to become a better negotiator, regardless of what economy we're in.
Wonderful. Well, I think what we can do, and since I know everyone, we're on the lunch hours, we appreciate everyone's time today. Stacy, we really appreciate you being here on behalf of the WILMAH organization. I'd like to thank you for being here today. And if you have any questions for Stacy or her team, please visit vetrecruiter.com for more information. And know that WILMAH will continue to have these webinars in the future. So please check back to wilmah.org and sign up for the newsletter, and you'll be sure to receive notification of our upcoming webinar. So thank you, everybody, for being a part of today. And as Stacy said, this will be recorded, so please check back to the website, and it will be posted. Thank you, Stacy, for being a part of today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Heather, for inviting me.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.